The Flying Saucers of Ezekiel. It is in the book of Ezekiel that we find the most interesting description of one of our flying machines. I looked, and, behold, a stormy wind came out of the north, a great cloud, with flashing lightning, and a brightness round about it, and out of the midst of it as it were glowing metal, out of the midst of the fire. Out of the midst of it came the likeness of 4 living creatures. This was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man. Everyone had 4 faces, and every one of them had 4 wings. Their feet were straight feet, and the sole of their feet was like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like burnished brass. They had the hands of a man under their wings on their 4 sides, and they 4 had their faces and their wings. Thus, their wings were joined one to another. They didn't turn when they went everyone straight forward. As for the likeness of their faces, they had the face of a man, and they 4 had the face of a lion on the right side, and they 4 had the face of an ox on the left side, they 4 had also the face of an eagle. Their faces and their wings were separate above, 2 wings of everyone were joined one to another, and 2 covered their bodies. They went everyone straight forward. Where the Spirit was to go, they went. They didn't turn when they went. As for the likeness of the living creatures, their appearance was like burning coals of fire, like the appearance of torches. The fire went up and down among the living creatures, and the fire was bright, and out of the fire went forth lightning. The living creatures ran and returned as the appearance of a flash of lightning. Now as I saw the living creatures, behold, 1 wheel on the arets beside the living creatures, for each of the 4 faces of it. The appearance of the wheels and their work was like a barquette, and they 4 had one likeness, and their appearance and their work was as it were a wheel within a wheel. When they went in their 4 directions, they didn't turn when they went. As for their rims, they were high and dreadful, and they 4 had their rims full of eyes round about. When the living creatures went, the wheels went beside them, and when the living creatures were lifted up from the arets, the wheels were lifted up. Wherever the Spirit was to go, they went. There was the Spirit to go, and the wheels were lifted up beside them, for the Spirit of the living creature was in the wheels. When those went, these went, and when those stood, these stood, and when those were lifted up from the arets, the wheels were lifted up beside them. For the Spirit of the living creature was in the wheels. Over the head of the living creature there was the likeness of an expanse, like the awesome crystal to look on, stretched forth over their heads above. Under the expanse were their wings straight, the one toward the other. Everyone had 2 which covered on this side, and every one had 2 which covered on that side, their bodies. When they went, I heard the noise of their wings like the noise of great waters, like the voice of Shaddai, a noise of tumult like the noise of a host. When they stood, they let down their wings. There was a voice above the expanse that was over their heads. When they stood, they let down their wings. Above the expanse that was over their heads was the likeness of a throne, as the appearance of a sapphire stone. And on the likeness of the throne was a likeness as the appearance of a man on it above. There you have a description, which could not be more precise, of the creators who had come out of their flying machines. The stormy wind is the trace of smoke or vapor trail that present-day planes leave behind them at high altitudes. Then the machine appeared with its blinking light, the flashing lightning, and glowing metal. Later, 4 creators appear wearing anti-gravity suits with small directional jet engines attached. These are described as the wings on their metal suits, and their feet sparkled like burnished brass. You have surely noticed how shiny the suits of your astronauts are. As for the flying saucers, or wheels, Their appearance and their operation were not at all badly described, considering it is a primitive person who is speaking. As it were a wheel within a wheel, they didn't turn when they went. In the center of the flying saucer, very similar to the one in which we are now sitting, was the habitable section, the rim. They four had their rims full of eyes round about. In the same way that our clothing has evolved and we no longer wear those cumbersome spacesuits, our vessels then had portholes, the eyes, around the rims, because we had not then discovered how to see through metallic walls by modifying their atomic structure at will. The flying saucers stayed near the creators, ready to help them if the need arose, since they were loading supplies and carrying out routine maintenance on the large intergalactic vessel above them. Other creators inside the vessels were directing them, for the spirit of the living creature was in the wheels. This is quite clear. The suit described with its 4 portholes was similar to your first diving suits. Everyone had 4 faces. They didn't turn when they went. The smaller saucers were something like your own LEMs, lunar excursion modules, small, short-range vehicles used for exploratory missions. Above them the larger interplanetary vessel waited. Above the expanse that was over their heads was the likeness of a throne, as the appearance of a sapphire stone. And on the likeness of the throne was a likeness as the appearance of a man on it above. The latter individual on the large vessel was supervising and coordinating the work of the creators. Frightened by all this, Ezekiel fell flat on his face before these things, which were so mysterious that they had to have come from no one other than God. But one of the creators said to him, "Son of man, stand on your feet, and I will speak with you. Hear what I tell you, and eat that which I give you." Ezekiel chapter 2 verse 1 and 7-8. This is an image like the eating from the tree of science of good and evil. It was intellectual food that he was given. In this case, it was a book. There was a hand stretched out to me, and behold, a scroll of a book was in it. There was writing on the inside and on the outside. There was writing on both sides, a very surprising thing at that time when usually only one side of parchment was written on. Then the scroll is eaten. This means that Ezekiel absorbed its meaning. What he learned is what you are learning now about humanity's origins. It was so exciting and comforting that he said, "Then did I eat it, and it was in my mouth as honey for sweetness." Ezekiel chapter 3 verse 3. Then Ezekiel is transported in the Creator's vessel to the place where he was to spread the news. Then the Spirit took me up, and I heard behind me a voice of a great rushing. Ezekiel chapter 3 verse 12. Further on, the prophet is transported once again in a flying machine, and the Spirit lifted me up between the earth and the heaven, and brought me in the visions of Elohim to Jerusalem. Ezekiel chapter 8 verse 3. Ezekiel noticed afterwards that beneath their wings, the cherubims had hands like humans, and there appeared in the cherubims the form of a man's hand under their wings. Ezekiel chapter 10 verse 8. And the cherubims lifted up their wings, and mounted up from the earth in my sight. When they went out, the wheels also were beside them. Ezekiel chapter 10 verse 19. Moreover the Spirit lifted me up, and brought me. Ezekiel chapter 11 verse 1. And the glory of Yahweh went up from the midst of the city, and stood upon the mountain which is on the east side of the city. Afterwards the Spirit took me up, and brought me in a vision by the Spirit of Elohim into Chaldea. Ezekiel chapter 11 verse 23-24. There you have some of the many journeys of Ezekiel in one of the Creator's flying machines. The hand of Yahweh was upon me, and carried me out in the Spirit of Yahweh, and set me down in the midst of the valley which was full of bones. Ezekiel chapter 37 verse 1. Here a miracle is about to happen. The creators go on to resurrect human beings whose only remains are their bones. As mentioned earlier, each particle of a living being contains all the information to reconstruct it completely. All you have to do is place one of these particles, for example from bone remains, in a machine, which provides all the living matter required to reconstruct that original being. The machine supplies the matter, and the particle supplies all the required information, the blueprint according to which the being will be built, just as a spermatozoan contains all the information necessary to create a living being in the first place, right down to the color of the hair and eyes. Son of man, can these bones live? There was a noise, and behold a shaking. The sinews and the flesh came up upon them, and the skin covered them above. And they lived, and stood up upon their feet, an exceeding great army. Ezekiel chapter 37 verse 3:10. All this is very easy to do, and you will do it someday. This is the origin of the ancient rituals in which elaborately protective sepulchres were built to bury great people, so that one day, they may be brought back to life everlasting. This is part of the secret of the tree of life, the secret of eternity. In chapter 40, Ezekiel is again carried away in a spacecraft, which takes him into the presence of someone wearing a spacesuit. Brought he me into the land of Israel, and set me upon a very high mountain, by which was as the frame of a city on the south. And he brought me thither, and, behold, there was a man, whose appearance was like the appearance of brass. Ezekiel chapter 40 verse 2-3. This city is one of the earth bases that the creators used at that time. They were always located on very high mountains so that the creators would not be disturbed by humans. The man, whose appearance was the appearance of brass, is, of course, wearing a metallic suit. Similarly, due to our small stature, we were often mistaken for children or cherubs. The priests in serving the creators in their terrestrial residence, the temple visited by Ezekiel, wore aseptic clothing when performing their duties, and those clothes always had to remain in the temple to avoid being contaminated by germs dangerous to the creators. When the priests enter therein, then shall they not go out of the holy place into the utter court, but there they shall lay their garments wherein they minister, for they are holy. Ezekiel chapter 42 verse 14. They should have written, for these garments are pure or sterile. But that was incomprehensible for primitive people who deified all that was told or shown to them at that period. In Ezekiel chapter 43, the big vessel, respectfully called, the glory of God, approached. The glory of the God of Israel came from the way of the east. His voice was like the sound of many waters, and the earth shone with his glory. Ezekiel 43:2. The creators did not want to be disturbed, so they issued a directive. This gate shall be shut, it shall not be opened, and no man shall enter in by it, because Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, hath entered in by it, therefore it shall be shut. Ezekiel chapter 44 verse 2. Only a prince is allowed to come and speak with the creators. It is for the prince, he shall sit in it to eat bread before Yahweh. Ezekiel chapter 44 verse 3. But the prince had to pass through a chamber where he was disinfected by special rays. He shall enter by the way of the porch of that gate, and shall go out by the way of the same. Ezekiel chapter 44 verse 3. The Levite priests were there to look after the creators. They shall come near to me to minister unto me, and they shall stand before me to offer unto me the fat and the blood. And they shall come near to my table, to minister unto me. Ezekiel chapter 44 verse 15-16. The odor of human perspiration was very unpleasant to the creators. When they enter in at the gates of the inner court, They shall be clothed with linen garments. They shall not gird themselves with anything that causeth sweat. Ezekiel chapter 44 verse 17-18. There is a description also of how the Elohim's supply of fresh products continued, the first of all the first fruits. Ye shall also give unto the priest the first of your dough, that he may cause the blessing to rest in thine house. Ezekiel chapter 44 verse 30. In chapter 3 of the book of Daniel, King Nebuchadnezzar condemned 3 men to the stake for refusing to worship a metal god instead of the creators, whom he knew existed. But the 3 men were saved by one of the creators who came to their aid in the glowing fire, armed with a repellent and refrigerative ray. He protected them from the heat and the flames with this and allowed them to walk away totally unscathed. Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the son of Elohim. Daniel 3:25. Further on, Daniel is cast into the lion's den, but the lions do not harm him. There again, nothing too complicated was involved, just a paralyzing beam to give enough time to get Daniel out of the den unharmed. My Elohim hath sent his angel, and hath shut the lions' mouths. Daniel 6:22. In the 10th chapter of Daniel, you will find another interesting description of a creator. Then I lifted up mine eyes, and looked, and behold a certain man. His body also was like the beryl, and his face as the appearance of lightning, and his eyes as lamps of fire, and his arms and his feet like in color to polished brass, and the voice of his words like the voice of a multitude. Daniel 10:5-6.